we would greatly appreciate that too, because from time to time some special things happen here. We'd love to have the opportunity to email you or text you and let you know about that. Well, today's word is the word impact. And most of us, if we're honest, we think, you know what, I'm really not an impactor. I don't get to impact a whole lot of people. I want to challenge your thinking on that, because every one of us gets an opportunity to impact people every day. I want you to think about how God could use you to build up somebody, to say something. What if you were to begin to look for a quality, a positive quality in somebody else's life every day, and look for an opportunity to share that with them? Great opportunity. You know what that's called? That's called ministry. That's what ministry is really all about. Ministry is one person, you, making an impact on one other person's life. It doesn't have to be gigantic. It could be relatively small. But God says, use those opportunities to touch the lives of people wherever you go. I've been praying for you today, and I've been praying for you throughout the week, and I want to continue to do that right now. Why don't you join me? Father, thank you for loving us. I thank you that despite the fact that you know everything about us, you still love us in an incredible way. You love us when we do stuff that's incredibly foolish. You love us even when we make wrong choices. Father, I thank you that you're a forgiving God, a kind God, a gracious God, a merciful God. Father, we really need to be reminded of that even today. I pray that each person here today would be encouraged as they think about who you are, how much you love them, and what you want to do in their lives. Remind us of that. Pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Stand together. Let's continue. Well, she appeared to be a freight train to me. She happened to be the most critical person I had ever run into in my life. You know, it's said about churches that in every church there's at least one incredibly critical person. Now, honestly, this is the truth. Honestly, if that person exists here, I have not really found that person yet. But I tend to attract critical people. People either tend to really, really like me or really, really not like me. And I obviously know where you guys are at, so thank you for loving me. It's a mutual kind of thing. I was in ministry for about a year, and I'm in the lobby, large lobby, pretty large church, and she started coming from across the corner. And I could just sense this was not going to be a good encounter. It seemed like there was steam coming out of her ears, and she was just moving forward and forward and forward and forward, and she got to me and she said this, "Young man!" And I knew that if you're calling me young man, it's like my mother calling me Edward. It is not going to be a good experience. And she began to read the riot act to me. I was the youth pastor at the time, and the previous night we had taken students out and we had done an event. We got back about 11 o'clock, and some of the kids hung around. And at that time, if you were a student driver, you had to be home by 12 o'clock. You couldn't drive after 12 o'clock. Well, her son decided he was going to hang around. He lived about a half an hour away from the church, and he left to go home about 11:45. Well, he got home after 12 o'clock, and of course that wasn't his fault. That was obviously my fault, at least according to Miss Critical. And she just hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered. That would not be my last encounter with her. And it was not one of those, like, you know, like there's a rule. There are rules of interaction, are there not? Like, I have my personal space. Like, do not get within this zone here, because this zone is my space. If you're really, 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 really upset with someone, you tend to get a little bit closer. And she is so close that I can actually smell her breath. And it's dragon breath. And I'm thinking, this is not good. I'll tell you, there are some incredibly critical people that you will run into. But I want to remind you, you're going to look in the mirror sometime today, and that person that stares back at you has the very same ability to be a critical person. In this series called My Big Fat Mouth, today we're going to talk about critical criticism, not constructive criticism, which, by the way, this is a little brief commercial here, just put it on pause for a second. Most of us who are critical in our criticism think that we're giving constructive criticism. So with all of that in mind, pull out the handout that I gave to you when you came in. Let's look at Roman numeral number 1. Here's what it says. Critical criticism is incredibly destructive. Critical criticism is incredibly destructive. Now, right now, I know that some of you are thinking, you know what, I am going to make sure that I get the link to this talk, and I'm going to send it to my boss at work because they really, really do need to hear that. Some of you are tempted right now to just sort of elbow the person next to you and go, this talk is for you. Well, I want to just really encourage you to think about, have I been critical? Notice that this sermon series is not called Their Big Fat Mouth. It's called My Big Fat Mouth. Every one of these things that we're talking about is really an issue that I have struggled with either currently or from time to time in my life. And I think that that would also be true for you as well. What does it really look like? We can tend to be critical on all kinds of things. You look at somebody and you're going, whoa, look at the way that person is dressed. You know what that's called? That's called critical criticism. Look at the way they drive. Look at the way they do this. Look at the way they do that. Look at what they post on Facebook. Look at, can you believe they went on vacation there? And we just have the ability to be incredibly, incredibly critical. I want to share with you a verse that probably most of you have heard of in the past. Some of you might have actually memorized it. It's found in Galatians chapter 5. And it's actually the Apostle Paul quoting Jesus. Here's what he said, Galatians chapter 5 and verse 14. He said, love your neighbor as your, anybody, as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, you and I realize sometimes that's difficult, especially depending on who your neighbor happens to be. And Jesus was not defining your neighbor as the person that lives in the home next to you, because that would be relatively easy, because then you have one on the left side, you have one on the right side, maybe you have one across the street, maybe you have somebody behind you. That's 4 neighbors. I mean, what's the possibility of any one of them being odd? Pretty high, exactly. But he goes on beyond that, and he said, look, anybody that you encounter throughout the day is your neighbor. And he's saying, look, I want you to love that person, interact with that person in the way God would interact with that person, and the way you would want to be interacted with. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, many of us have heard of that verse. Have you heard of that verse? Raise your hand. You've heard of that verse? Yeah, raise your hand. All right. Most of us, though, even if we know that verse, we don't know the verse that follows it. Because the Apostle Paul said that verse for a very real reason. Here's the context. It's Galatians chapter 5 and verse 14. It says, for the entire law, in other words, what you and I know as the Old Testament, the entire law is fulfilled in keeping one command. In other words, he's saying, let me summarize the Old Testament for you. You don't have to read it all. Let me summarize it. And he says, I'm going to summarize the whole Old Testament by saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why did he tell him that? He told them that because the people at the church in the city of Galatia were a lot like you and a lot like me. Here's what the next verse says. If you have your copy of the scriptures, look at it with me. It's verse 15, Galatians chapter 5. It's on page 813. It says this, if you bite and devour each other, if you bite and devour each other. It's really a language that was typically used for a ferocious animal that was on the attack, not with the purpose of just playing, but with harming the other person. In other words, in this church in Galatia, there were people that were not loving their neighbors as themselves. There were people that were biting and devouring each other. Many of you know that about 2 weeks ago, Carol and I purchased a puppy called Zumi. And Zumi is about 4 pounds. She's just a little thing. But she thinks she is a wild, ferocious animal. She's a little Yorkie. And apparently, she has not yet been to obedience school. Because what she does, if she can get to any part of your body, she will not lick it, she will not kiss it, she will bite it. And she has these little sharp teeth. I know because on this finger, you can't see this, but on that finger right there, there is a major nick. You know why? She bit it. She just bites and attacks. One of the things that you don't know necessarily about me or about Ryan, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here for you. Ryan, even in his home, always keeps his shoes on. Me, I want to take those shoes off as quickly as, if I could preach in bare feet, I really would. If I wouldn't offend you, that's what I would do. If I'm in my house, those shoes are coming off. If I'm driving my car, those shoes are coming off being stuffed underneath the seat. My shoes are always off. I hate shoes. My dog has figured this out. My dog is not a toe nibbler. My dog is a toe chomper. I mean, she will just bite down into my big toe, and I'm going, dog. And you would think that I would figure it out by now and go, okay, you got to keep your feet up. You got to get what? No, I am surprised every time. The Apostle Paul is saying, look, you have to love every person that you encounter. You got to love your neighbor as your what? As yourself. He says the reason for that is that some of you have this tendency to bite and devour one another. Bite and devour one another. He goes on to say this, so watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. Watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. Some of us, we are constantly critical. Some of us are continually harsh. Some of us are always cutting down other people. And honestly, when we do that, sometimes we convince ourselves it's okay. Because I'm just telling you the truth. They really needed to hear that. And I was the one to just share that little bit of information with them. If you're married and you want to ruin your marriage, be a critical person. Always point out to your spouse what they don't bring to the table. If you have kids and you want to make sure that your kids go to prison when they're old, begin right now by reminding them they don't add up. Just constantly badger them. Don't do it. Don't go there. If you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of people coming over to your house when you don't want them to come over to your house, all you got to do is be an incredibly critical person, and you won't have very many friends. Because critical people, nobody goes, you know what? I really hope I have a lot of friends that are critical. When I'm old, I want to be like them. Nobody does that. Nobody says, that's the model for me. I really want to be like that. Jesus said this in John chapter 13 and verse 35. He's talking to his disciples, and he goes, let me give you what the primary marker is that people will know that you are a follower of me. And let me give you the marker. Here it is. He says, if you're going to follow me, you will have love one for another. Why did he have to say that? Because it is not, despite what you might have been told, it is not natural for you to love other people. It's not natural. Because other people, especially those people that get close to you, they can annoy you. Have you noticed this? Don't point, just think about it. And when they annoy you, you might be tempted to do something about it and say something negative to them. The Apostle Paul picked up on that thought, and he says this in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29. He says this, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Now, typically when you read that, you think, okay, he's talking about cussing, he's talking about this, he's talking about that, but he's probably not talking about what you think he's talking about, because he clarifies that in the next portion of the verse. He says, but only what is helpful, what builds others up according to their needs and might benefit those who listen to you. Those who listen to you. What's he saying? Only speak positive, beneficial words. Look for opportunities to build up people who are around you. Well, I want to try and help you to understand those principles and drill down with you on that today. In your notes, number one is this. You have no idea how a single word of criticism can pierce someone's soul. You have no idea how a single word of criticism can easily pierce someone's soul. I want to share with you some verses in the Bible. The Bible has a lot of verses that are contrasting. In other words, it'll say you could do this or you could do that. The first portion is what's correct. The second portion is what's not correct. There are those of us that are subtly critical. You ever get a grandma burn? You go, what is a grandma burn? A grandma burn is when she subtly criticizes you, and you don't even realize it until you're walking away. A grandma burn sounds something like this. She says, did you lose your phone? And you're thinking, oh, Isn't that sweet? She thinks maybe I've lost my phone. And you go, no, Grandma. Why do you ask? And what does she say? Well, because you haven't called me in the last 2 weeks. I could have been dead and no one would have known. That's called boom, Grandma burn right there. You see, sometimes we say those kinds of things. There's an interesting passage of Scripture, Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18. Here's what it says. The words of the reckless pierce like swords. The words of the reckless pierce like swords. I don't know when the last time you were pierced with a sword. Anybody remember? But it looks to me to be somewhat painful. Would you agree? You can't just go, whoa, that's a little nick. If you are pierced with a sword, the word pierced being the idea that the sword not only went into you, it came out of you, that is going to be incredibly painful. But when we throw around reckless words, we think, well, it's not that bad. It was just like a little fly swatter. It's just a little tap. It's all just a little tap, little tap, little tap, little tap, little tap. You ever have somebody just comes up and starts flicking the back of your ear? And the first time it was sort of cute and fun, wasn't it? And the second time it was almost a little bit cute and fun. By the 15th time you're going to do it again, you will die. Do it one more time, and I will have to take the living breath out of your lungs, and you will die. Reckless words, the scriptures say, reckless words, they pierce like swords. Things that you and I say that hurt other people can stick with them for not only weeks, not only for months, but for years. We have to be incredibly careful about the things that we say. But in the same way that words can be critical, that can be harsh, that can be harmful, those words can also be incredibly beneficial and positive. It's number 2 in your notes. Here it is. You have no idea how God can use a single word, notice that, a single word to encourage, to build someone up. A single word of encouragement to build someone up. Back to Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18 that said, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. The tongue of the wise brings healing. So let me ask you the question. Which side of the street do you tend to live on? Do you tend to live on the reckless side that you're piercing people with your words? Or do your words bring healing? Now, I know that it'd be very easy to say, well, I'm sort of in the middle. But if I forced you to go to either street, which street would you go to? And maybe you can't answer that question. Maybe you have to begin to think about, what would my friends say? Which side of the street do I live on? Remember, Ephesians chapter 4 said what? Look, only speak what is helpful to build others up according to their needs for the benefit of those who listen. It might be hard for you to believe, but when I was in college, I got in a lot of trouble. I went to a Bible college. You're not supposed to get in trouble going to Bible college, because if you go to Bible college, you're supposed to be, good. I don't know if I was bad, but my mother would describe me as ornery, which is just a simple way to say, he's bad, but really has a good heart, because he's my son. It just seems that in Bible college, I would be able to do things that other people, like the authorities, like the dean of men, didn't exactly find to be humorous. I thought some of the stuff I did was hilariously funny. At LBC, where I went to college, Lancaster Bible College, one of the things that would happen is they would what's called, quote-unquote, campus you. They don't do it anymore because it's probably illegal. What it meant was that for 1 week, you would have to stay in your dorm room, could not go anywhere except to the cafeteria or except to classes. You say, well, how did you get campused? Well, my freshman year, I got campused because my roommates and I thought it would be really fun during the night, the middle of the night, to get water balloons, take them up and throw it on the RA while he was sleeping. I thought that was hilariously funny. I thought it was hilarious, big time funny. Apparently, he didn't think so, and so I was campus for a week, had to stay in my room for a week solid. And when you were in public, quote unquote, you weren't allowed to talk to anyone. It was as if you had leprosy. And so since I do have, you might have noticed, somewhat of a sense of humor, I decided that it would be fun to go into the cafeteria just so no one would accidentally talk to me, because the rule was if they came up and initiated conversation with me, they too would be campused. Yeah, it's like a Nazi concentration camp. That's the kind of place I went to school. And so I would go into the cafeteria and just start going, unclean, unclean, unclean. I thought it was sort of funny. Apparently, they didn't think that was very funny. That was my freshman year. My sophomore year, we had a foosball game in the middle of the student union building. And some of my friends and I decided it would be fun to take the foosball game hostage and hide it someplace. And so in the middle of the night, we snuck into the room. We had keys. We snuck into the room and moved it and hid it someplace and left a note behind. I thought it was hilariously funny. The dean of men, not so much. Got campused again. Unclean, unclean. 2 weeks after that happened, I got a call from the dean of women saying, come see me in my office. I'm going, oh, this can't be good. I mean, it's one thing if the dean of men calls you in the office and you're a guy. That seems sort of normal. If the dean of women calls you in the office and you're not a woman, it seems like, I don't know, that's sort of weird. I went in there and I'm thinking, this is not going to go very well. Her name was Sally Laufer, and Sally Laufer was a very gracious, kind, loving person. She says, Ed, come on and sit down. She says, I want you to know. Now, this is 2 weeks after I was campus for the second time. She says, I want you to know, I really see a lot of positive qualities in you. I think you're going to be an amazing leader. And I'm looking at her like, are you kidding me? That's it? That's why? And she said, yeah, that's it. You can go now. And I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. That happened somewhere around November of my sophomore year. School ended the beginning of December, went home, got a call between semesters from the dean of men. That's probably not a good thing, because as the phone's ringing and I pick it up and he's telling me it's the dean of men, instantly I'm thinking, okay, what did I do that they didn't know that I did yet, because I'm about to really get in trouble. And he said, Ed, the RA in your section of the dorm is not going to come back for the second semester, and so we were thinking about who ought to be the next RA in your section of the dorms, and I was talking to the dean of women, and she said that you should become the next RA. And I'm going, are you kidding me? Party on, this is going to be great. And I became the RA in my dorm after being campus 2 times. Now here's the thing. Remember the first woman, the trained woman that came in there and like ripped my eyes right out of the sockets? This other woman, Sally, was the exact opposite of her. You see, she saw good things in me. There might have only been this much that was good in there, but she saw it, and she brought it to the table, and I, even to this day, remember that meeting. You see, words are powerful. When you and I have the opportunity to speak into people's lives, we need to take those opportunities. So you really do have 2 options. You can use words that are going to tear people down, or you can use words that are going to build people up. Most of us love options, do we not? I mean, you go into a restaurant. Some of you are going to stop in a restaurant on the way home today, and they're not going to come to the table and go, today we have beef stew. And you go, okay, what else? That's it. That's all we got. You're going, I didn't want that. I want to see the menu. And they go, look, there's one thing on the menu. We got beef stew. If you want to eat here, that's what we have. That's not going to happen in any restaurant that you go to, is it? You're going to get a menu, you're going to flip through it, you're going to flip through it, all kinds of options. Some of them you're going to go, that's good, that's not good. We love options. You have 2 options with your tongue. We're going to talk about those 2 options. The choice is really yours. Do not allow yourself, by the way, to have an excuse to go, you know what, that's just who I am. I am just a critical person. I mean, that's just my wiring. I can't help it. That's a lie. It's just not true. You have 2 options. Here they are. Let me give them to you. Number 3 in your notes. You have 2 options regarding speaking into someone's life. 2 options regarding speaking into someone's life. The first is this. Letter A, you could be a destroyer who critically points out the faults of others. You can be a destroyer who critically points out the faults of others. It's so easy to look at people and go, you know what, I don't like the way that person walks. You know, I don't like the way that person talks. I don't like the way they dress. I don't like the way that person breathes. And you go, really? You got a problem with breathing? Have you ever been around someone in a quiet place where someone breathes like you're going, you need a lung transplant? It's like Darth Vader is in the room with you, and you're thinking, what is with that person? I was in a hotel room with a friend of mine He was in his 80s. His name's Tom. And Tom, he breathes like that just when he's talking to you. And I'm thinking, I'm a light sleeper. He is going to keep me up all night, because if he breathes like that when he's awake, how do you think he's going to breathe when he is sleeping? He is going to snore like a wounded goat. You go, what does a wounded goat sound like? It sounds like Tom. And I am thinking the whole night, I am seriously thinking, I cannot sleep. And then this thought comes into my mind. If I took the pillow and just put it over his face for about 15 seconds until the legs stop thrashing, I could sleep the rest of the night. Now, fortunately, since I don't want to go to prison, I pushed that thought out of my mind. But I am thinking, what is wrong with you? The next morning, I found out what was wrong with him. Tom said to me, well, I had a rough night. And I'm thinking, yeah, dude, you had a rough night. I didn't sleep a wink. And he goes, yeah, I thought I was having a heart attack. Now, if you're with somebody like 26, and you're going, yeah, you're not having a heart attack. You're with somebody that's like 87, and he goes, yeah, I thought I was having a heart attack. Yes, you probably were. I lived through the whole thing. It amazed me that I could have that kind of an attitude toward a guy that's an incredible guy. I could just see the negative stuff. I think we've probably all been there. There's a group of people in the scriptures that Jesus encountered a lot called the Pharisees. They were incredibly good at seeing the faults of others. As a matter of fact, in Mark chapter 3 and verse 1, it says this. Mark chapter 3, verse 1, it says, another time Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a weak and twisted hand was there. Now, you'd think if you see a man with a weak and twisted hand and you could do something about that, you would do something about that. The Pharisees also see the man with a weak and twisted hand, but they go, we're going to use that to trap Jesus. Because they knew that Jesus was a kind and caring person, and there was a real good possibility that he would heal that man, and it just so happens to be the Sabbath day, which it wasn't legal, quote unquote, to do anything like that on a Sabbath day. It says some of the Pharisees, verse 2, were trying to find fault with Jesus. Catch that phrase? They were trying to find fault with Jesus. They watched him closely. They wanted to see if he would heal the man on the Sabbath day. They were trying to find fault with Jesus. I wonder if that phrase could ever be used of you or of me. That you're trying to find fault. It's your natural grid. Well, not only did the Pharisees destroy people with their words, and they were always looking to try to find fault, Satan himself does the very same thing, and he does it with you. Here's what it says in Revelation chapter 12, it says that Satan, the accuser of our brothers and sisters, accuses them before God day and night, always looking to try to find fault. You and I have to be better than that. We cannot be destroyers of people. So here's the question. Why in the world would I want to try to find fault in others and constantly point those things out? 3 possible reasons. There might be more. Let me give you 3 today. The first is this. You can be a fault finder because you're full of pride. Because you're full of pride. You think, you know what? I got it together. If you were like me, you too could have it together. It could be a pride issue with you. Could be a pride issue. The second bullet point is this. You can be a fault finder because you're insecure. You can be a fault finder because you're insecure. You see, you realize that if I push other people down, if I point out their flaws, it makes me feel better. It makes me look like I am better than they are. It could be that you're a fault finder. It also could be, third bullet point, you can be a fault finder because you don't take the time to understand. You don't take the time to understand. You don't take the time to understand. Carol and I have 3 kids. And our oldest daughter is 36 years old, which means I'm incredibly old. That's what that means. I got to tell you, before we had kids, I thought, this parenting thing, how hard can it be? I remember going in the grocery store and seeing someone that had the bratty kid, the kid that wants the candy bar, as they're waiting in line, and thinking, lady, you need help. You should read your Bible. It's real simple. Discipline the kid now. And I'm thinking, how hard can it be? Well, then we had our own kids. And all of a sudden I realized that sometimes you are just going to be tempted to just give in to the terrorist. You're thinking, you can have the Porsche. I'll buy the Porsche for you. I'll get you a pony. I will get you whatever you want as long as you stop crying and screaming right now. Here's the thing. When you get a little bit older and you get a little bit wiser, all of a sudden you got an opportunity to look at that kid and go, maybe it's not as easy as it says in the book. You see, you and I can easily rip people when we don't take the time to understand why the situation is what it is. Be incredibly, incredibly careful. So you got to ask yourself, have you ever met a critical person? You go, I really like them. I want to be like them. Has anybody ever met that person that's critical and mean-spirited and you go, I want to be like them? You haven't, have you? But somebody, when they're asked that question, might say that about you or about me. We could be somebody else's pain. Now, I want to share a verse with you, and before I share it with you, I want to just caution you, okay? Big time caution, so focus with me just for a moment. I want to share this verse with you. When I share it with you, I want to make sure that you just continue to breathe a normal breath. Make sure that your heart rate doesn't get up. Make sure that you don't say amen, preach it, hallelujah. Make sure that you don't do any of that. Make sure you don't jab the person next to you, okay? Fair enough? All right, here's the verse. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 19. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 19. It is better to live in a desert. Now, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem like that's exactly primo ground, right? There aren't a lot of Airbnbs in a desert. It is better to live in a desert than to live with a nagging, angry wife. I told you, no hallelujahs, no amens, breathe. Gentlemen, look straight on right now, okay? Look straight right here. It is better to live in a desert than with a nagging, angry wife. Why is that true? Because no one wants to be around someone who's angry or critical. No one wants to be around that person. Now you go, surely there is a verse like that that applies to men or husbands, because critical, spirited people are not simply female. They're also male. And so I checked. There isn't one. Fret not, though. I made one up for you. If I were going to write a book in the Bible, it's called Edekiah. See how that goes? Edekiah. First Edekiah chapter 13, verse 1. Here it is, ladies. This is for you. First Edekiah chapter 13, verse 1. It is better to have bamboo shoots forced under your fingernails than to live with a man who constantly picks you apart. Good verse, isn't it? Yeah, it's not in there. I just made it up. But it's true, nevertheless. You see, it is so hard to be around someone who's critical, someone who thinks they have it all together, and they're always pointing out your faults. It's so hard to be around that person. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a point in time where you have to address an issue with your spouse, with your kid, with your neighbor, with a coworker. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there is a way to do that. Speak the truth in love. You and I have to be incredibly careful. Remember Job? There's a book called the Book of Job, and Job experienced some incredible life difficulties. His friends came to him, and they wanted to help him, but all they did was they pointed out why he was a horrible person and why he was going through all of this stuff. And so it gets to the point in Job chapter 16 where he's had enough. You ever been there? You're just going to go, no more. No more, no more. You can also tell when you're getting to that point because your hand, if you're right-handed, I guarantee you it'll be your right hand, it begins to tremor. And it begins to rise. And it begins to go towards their neck. And you're thinking, I just want to get my hand around your neck. That's where Job is at in this passage. Here's what it says. Job chapter 16, verse 1. It says, then Job replied to these three counselors, his friends, and he says, I've heard many things like these, but you are miserable comforters, all of you. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing with me? I also could speak like you, but if you were in my place, I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you too. And then he says this, listen to verse 5. But my mouth, rather than do that, my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief. You and I have got to decide that we will not live on that side of the street. We have got to bring comfort to people. We've got to care about people. We've got to love people like we love ourselves. Here's letter B in your notes. Other side of the street. You can be a people builder who graciously points out the positives of others. You can be a people builder who graciously points out the positives of others. I spoke with someone from the church a couple of days ago at my house, and she said, you know, last week at the end you shared an announcement about we really need help setting up. And she said, you know, I just have to tell you, I chuckled inside. And she said, I thought it was so funny that I actually elbowed the person next to me, because here's what I said. I said, we could really use some help setting up. We meet about 8:15 if you could be here. It takes about an hour to set up. Now, we also have a tear-down team, but honestly, it's a lot easier to tear things down than it is to set things up. And she said, when you said that, I found that incredibly hilarious because it's so true about people. It's always going to be easier to tear people down than it is to set them up, to build them up. I want to challenge you. Be a person who builds up others. Jesus was incredibly good at doing that. As a matter of fact, in John chapter 8, the Pharisees, remember them? The critical Pharisees, they come to Jesus. They bring a woman who is caught in the act of adultery. And they say to Jesus, the scriptures say that she needs to be stoned. What do you say? And Jesus said something incredibly astute. He said, he who's without the first sin can cast the first stone. He who's without sin can cast the first stone. And then it says he got down and he wrote in the sand. You go, what was he writing in the sand? His to-do list for the next week? I don't think so. I wonder if what he was writing in the sand was the names of the people that are out there getting ready to throw the rocks. And then it says he stooped down a second time and he again wrote in the sand. I wonder if underneath everybody's name, he just began to put down the list of things that they had done that were wrong. And then the scriptures say that one by one, starting with the older Pharisees, the older critical people, one by one, they went away. And Jesus said this then to the woman caught in the act of adultery. He said, where are your accusers? Where are the ones that want to throw the rocks? And she said, sir, they're no longer here. Where are the ones that want to condemn you? And she says, they're not here. And then he said, then neither do I condemn you. Go, leave your life of sin and experience change. You know what Jesus was really good at? He was good at pointing out things, but he always left people with hope. You see, if you've got to address an issue with somebody, then give them hope. Be in it with them so they can experience true life change. God truly does want to change your life. And he wants to change the lives of others that are around you, and he wants to use you to do that. So the next time you're thinking about how you're going to interact with your spouse or a coworker, think about how you could build them up rather than tear them down. The next time you want to point out to your kid that they aren't really going to make it, begin to think about what's going on that's positive in their life rather than just what's negative in their lives. Romans chapter 15 and verse 2, very interesting passage. Romans chapter 15 and verse 2, it says this, we should all please our neighbors. Let us do what is good for them. Let us build them up. Let us build them up. Build people up. Build people up. There are 2 bullet points I want to give to you to help you walk away with the real thought on that. Here's the first. Take the time to daily look for a positive quality in someone and tell them. Take the time to daily look for a positive quality in someone and tell them. Take the time to daily look for a positive quality in someone and tell them. Some of you I know are school teachers. Those of us that think back to when we were in school, if you have a favorite teacher, I guarantee you she or he was one of your favorite teachers because they spoke positive words into your life. They built you up. So what does that look like? If you got a kid who's not the neatest kid in the world, in other words, their room always looks like a disaster, you can try to point that out to them day after day after day after day, and that's going to feel a lot like nagging after a while. Maybe, rather than pointing that out day after day after day, you ought to be thinking about what's a positive quality that I can share with my kid today. If you're married to someone, if you're a husband, you're married to someone, and maybe your wife's not the most organized person in the world, you could try to point that out day after day after day, or you can look at her and you can go, you know, honey, the way I just watch how you really love our kids, and you are doing an amazing job. If you're a wife and you got a husband, and you look outside and you go, wow, our yard looks incredibly bad. I mean, it's actually an embarrassment. It looks like there could be lost children in our backyard because the grass is so high. And you realize that your husband, hates to cut the grass. He just doesn't like to do it. The next time he's out there cutting the grass, you got to think about saying something like this. Honey, sweetie pie, boo-boo, when you're out there in your shorts, and your black socks and sneakers, I got to tell you, that does something for me. I have never seen a sexy man like that. Behind that mower, vroom, vroom. I mean, honey, I'm telling you, he will cut the grass. You will have burned out grass by the end of the summer. That's a tip. That's for free today. We need to look for opportunities. We need to look for opportunities to build people up. Remember, the scriptures say, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, the tongue has the power of life and death. You can harm people with the things you say, or you can build people up with the things that you say. I got to confess to you that I am a natural critical person. That's who I am. When I was in my 20s, if I had a thought that came into my head and it was about you and something you needed to change, I would have told you. And I wouldn't have told you in a very nice way. I was a full-fledged jerk. You don't believe me? Ask Carol. She'll tell you. She took the brunt of a lot of that. During the years since then, God has humbled me a lot. I've experienced some spiritual growth, and I don't do that nearly as often as I used to. But I will tell you this. I could easily snap right back into that grid. I have to wake up in the morning and think, I need to speak positive things into people's lives and build them up. Maybe you're in the same camp with me. So here's the thing. When you're thinking about what I should say, if it's not positive, let me give you a tip. Don't say it. Let me give you the last thought, last bullet point. Here it is. Don't intentionally seek to point out the speck, quote unquote, in the eyes of others. Instead, see the log in your own eye. Don't intentionally look for an opportunity to seek to point out the speck in the eyes of others. Instead, see the log in your own eye. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Listen to these words. Do not judge others. The word judge there has the idea of don't have a critical spirit towards someone. Don't critically criticize them. He's not saying there isn't a time that you ought to help someone who's going through a situation. You go, it looks to me like there could be a problem here. Can I help you with it? He's not saying that. He's talking about critical criticism. Do not judge others, because then you're also going to be judged incorrectly. Verse 2, you'll be judged in the same way that you judge others. You'll be measured in the same way that you measure others. Now he gets down and he's going to give you an illustration. Look at the bit of sawdust in your friend's eye, but you pay no attention to the piece of wood in your own eye. Notice it says bit of sawdust. That's a fairly small particle, right? and you pay no attention to the piece of wood in your own eye? How can you say to your friend, let me take the bit of sawdust out of your eye? How can you say this while there's a piece of wood in your eye? Then he says, verse 5, you pretender, you hypocrite. Don't go there. First, take the piece of wood out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to take the bit of sawdust out of your friend's eye. Here's the thing. You and I really need to evaluate our own lives before we evaluate the lives of others. Evaluate your own life. And be honest with other people. And go, you know what? I've been struggling with that. I got struggles in my life. One of the things I love about CrossPointe is that it's a real church. It's a church where you can come to and you go, you know what? I got some messiness. Some weeks you can come and you go, you know what? I am incredibly messed up this week. But I want to give you hope. Because no matter how messy you are, God says, I can work in your life. I can change your life, and I can do it today if you'll cooperate with me. What if you and I had the kind of mindset that said, God, change me first, and then help me to speak into others' lives in a positive way, in a way that builds people up? What if you began to look at others the way Jesus looks at you? You know how he looks at you? He goes, I really love you. As a matter of fact, I am enamored with you. Yes, I know everything that's going on in your life, but I still really love you. Do I want you to change those things? Yes. Will I help you to change those things? Yes. But even if you don't, I will still really love you. What if you had that kind of an attitude toward people in your life? And when you did speak into their lives, you spoke with grace and truth. Sometimes we're just really good at speaking truth. Here's the thing. Everything that you say needs to be true. You understand that, right? Everything you say needs to be true. But not everything that's truthful needs to be said. That's a great statement, by the way. Not everything that's truthful needs to be said. Sometimes you just ought to keep that inside. Look for an opportunity when God gives you an open door. If you force that, it will not work. Here's the simple truth this morning. Determine to see others the way Jesus sees them. You and I need to determine to see others the way Jesus sees them, and then regularly speak positive words of affirmation to build them up. Regularly speak positive words of affirmation to build them up. What side of the street do you live on? The critical side, the build-up side? You tearing people down, piercing them with a sword, or building them up? Most of us, if we're honest, would say, you know what, I really probably am somewhere in the middle, which means that we critically criticize far too much, and we don't build people up nearly enough. Will you make a commitment today to say, God, change my spirit? God, help me to really build people up. God, help me to really encourage someone each day this next week. Would you do that? Would you be willing to say, you know what, I'll do it. I will ask God to lay on my heart opportunities to build people up. Pray with me about that right now, would you? Father, we really do need your help. We need to understand what we bring to the table and what we don't bring to the table. And I pray that right now you'd speak very, very clearly to each of us. Help us to understand how it's so easy for us to be negative. Help us to understand the opportunities that you're going to give to us to speak positive words and build people up, whether it's our kids, whether it's our spouse, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a friend. Would you ask God to do that in your heart right now? Would you make a commitment for the next 7 days? God, I'm not going to speak negatively. I'm not going to hurt people. I'm going to be cautious in what I say. And God, beyond that, I'm going to look for opportunities to speak positive truth into the lives of people I encountered this week. Would you make that commitment? Ask God to change your heart, because it's really a heart issue. Ask him to change you. Would you do that right now? Take the time. Pray about that.